First Sunday of April 1865 began with a cruel and deceptive beauty. In Richmond, Virginia, the air was thick with the scent of blooming magnolias and the fresh, wet earth of spring. The sky was a porcelain blue, stretched taut over the 7 hills of the city. To the casual observer, it was a morning of resurrection, a day of worship in the capital of the Confederacy. But to Captain Elias Thorne, standing on the granite steps of the custom house, the city did not smell of flowers. It smelled of iron, stale whiskey, and the impending rot of a dying empire. Elias adjusted the collar of his gray uniform, which had long since lost its trim and luster. He was 34 years old, but the war had carved the lines of a 50-year-old into his face. He was not a man of the front lines anymore. A canister shot at Cold Harbor had taken 2 fingers from his left hand and left him with a permanent limp. But he was a man of burdens. As a trusted aide to the Department of the Treasury, his war was now fought with ledgers, bullion, and secrets. And today the secrets were becoming too heavy to carry. "It's too quiet, Elias," a voice murmured beside him. Elias didn't turn. He knew the voice. It was Julian Craven's, a clerk with ink-stained fingers and a nervous disposition that had only worsened as General Grant's Union Army tightened its noose around Petersburg, just 25 miles to the south. "The churches are full, Julian," Elias replied softly, watching a carriage rattle down Main Street. "The people are praying. That's why it's quiet." "They aren't praying for victory anymore," Cravens whispered, checking over his shoulder, as if a federal spy might be hiding behind a pillar. "They're praying for mercy." Elias didn't answer. He looked toward the spire of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. President Jefferson Davis was there, as he was every Sunday. The government was trying to project an image of calm stability. But Elias knew the truth. He knew that the rail lines to the south were hanging by a thread. He knew that the treasury vaults in the basement beneath them held the last lifeblood of the rebellion. Gold, double eagles, Mexican silver dollars, copper, and bullion. If Richmond fell, that gold could not fall with it. Inside St. Paul's, the air was cool and reverent. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass, painting the congregation in hues of crimson and violet. President Davis sat in his pew, his back rigid, his face a mask of stoic determination. He looked like a man carved from marble, unyielding even as the world cracked around him. The service was proceeding with the usual solemnity until the heavy oak doors at the back of the nave creaked open. It was not a noisy entrance, but it shattered the atmosphere of the room. A sexton moved swiftly down the aisle, his shoes clicking on the stone floor. He carried a distinct air of disaster. He stopped at the president's pew and handed Davis a folded piece of paper. Elias, who had slipped into the back of the church to keep watch, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He watched Davis's hands. They did not tremble. The president unfolded the telegram. It was from General Robert E. Lee. The message was brief, brutal, and final. "My lines are broken in 3 places. Richmond must be evacuated this evening." Davis's expression did not change. He did not gasp. He simply rose, his face pale but composed, and walked out of the church. He walked with the dignity of a man marching to the gallows, but as he passed Elias in the vestibule, the captain saw the president's eyes. They were haunted. The moment the doors closed behind the president, a ripple of unease swept through the congregation. Then, the sexton returned to the front and whispered to the rector. The rector announced that the local militia should assemble immediately. The illusion of Sunday broke. The screaming began 10 minutes later. By 2 p.m., the Department of the Treasury was an ant-hill that had been kicked over. "Move it! Move it, damn you!" Captain William H. Parker of the Confederate Navy stood in the center of the vault room, barking orders. Parker was a hard man. a man of the sea currently commanding a fleet of midshipmen on land. He had been tasked with the impossible, guarding the treasure. Elias Thorne heaved a wooden crate onto his shoulder, his bad leg protesting the weight. The box was small but incredibly heavy. It was filled with gold sovereigns. "Captain Thorne!" Parker shouted over the din of crashing ledgers and shouting clerks. "How many wagons?" "We have 3 buckboards out back, sir, and the train is waiting at the Danville depot." But the crowds. The streets are filling up. "Run them over if you have to," Parker snapped, wiping sweat and soot from his forehead. "This is the property of the Confederate States of America. It does not belong to the Yankees, and it certainly does not belong to the mob." Elias nodded and hauled the crate toward the loading dock. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic. Richmond was unraveling. The news of the evacuation had spread like a virus. The government had ordered the burning of sensitive documents, and already, smoke was billowing from the windows of the War Department. Ash rained down like black snow, coating the cobblestones and the faces of the panic-stricken citizens. But it wasn't just documents burning. General Ewell, the military commander of the city, had ordered the destruction of the tobacco warehouses to prevent the valuable crop from falling into Union hands. It was a military decision made without regard for the wind. Elias stepped out into the alleyway and was hit by a wall of heat. The Shockoe Slip District was igniting. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying smell of burning tobacco, mixed with the acrid stench of tar. "Stay close!" Elias yelled to the 2 young midshipmen helping him. "Don't stop for anyone!" They loaded the bullion onto the wagons. The horses were skittish, their eyes rolling in terror as embers drifted onto their flanks. As Elias climbed onto the lead wagon, a woman ran up to him. She was dressed in fine silk, now stained with mud, clutching a silver candelabra in one hand and a terrified child in the other. "Sir! Sir! Is there room on the train?" she screamed, grabbing the wheel of the wagon. "My husband is in North Carolina. Please!" Elias looked down at her. He saw the desperation that leveled all classes. Rich and poor were currently equal in their terror. "The train is for government archives and the treasury, madam," Elias said, his voice hard but his heart breaking. "You must head for the canal boats. Go west." "The boats are full!" she wailed. "Make way!" Captain Parker roared from the wagon behind. Elias snapped the reins. The horses surged forward, pushing through the throng of people. He didn't look back at the woman. He couldn't afford pity. He was sitting on top of $500,000 in gold, silver, and bullion, and every pair of eyes on the street looked hungry. The journey to the Danville depot was a descent into hell. The city council, in a final act of stupidity or desperation, had ordered the destruction of all liquor stocks to prevent the invading Union Army from getting drunk. They rolled barrels of whiskey and brandy out of the saloons and government warehouses and smashed them open in the streets. But the gutters were clogged with debris. The liquor didn't drain away. It pooled. It formed rivers of high-proof alcohol flowing down the cobblestones. And then the sparks from the burning tobacco warehouses found the whiskey. Elias watched in horror as the street ahead of them erupted in blue flames. The very ground was on fire. Men and women, driven mad by the impending doom, threw themselves onto their knees, scooping up the burning liquor with their hands, drinking from the gutters, even as the fire singed their eyebrows. It was a scene from Dante. "Go around," Elias shouted to the driver. "Take 14th Street!" They swerved, the wagon wheels bouncing violently over the stones. The gold in the back clattered, a sound distinct from the roar of the fire. A group of stragglers, Confederate deserters by the look of their mismatched uniforms, heard the sound. One of them, a giant of a man with a bandage over one eye, lunged for the wagon. "That ain't paper money," the man shouted, drawing a rusted Bowie knife. "That's heavy. Share the wealth, you government rats." Elias didn't hesitate. He drew his Laymat revolver and fired. The shot was swallowed by the noise of the city, but the man dropped, clutching his shoulder. The mob flinched back. "The next one goes in ahead," Elias warned, leveling the smoking barrel at them. They let the wagons pass. The Danville train station was a fortress of chaos. Locomotives hissed steam, their iron bellies glowing red. The platform was a sea of humanity, cabinet members clutching portfolios, wounded soldiers begging for a ride, ladies fainting in the heat. President Davis was already there. He stood near the locomotive that would carry the executive branch, looking calm amidst the bedlam. He was speaking to his Secretary of War, John C. Breckinridge. Elias and Parker maneuvered their wagons to the rear of the train, to the boxcars designated for the Treasury. This was the specie train. "Load it up," Parker ordered. "Double time. We leave in 20 minutes, with or without the president." Elias worked until his muscles burned. They passed box after box into the dark maw of the train. There were kegs of Mexican silver dollars, heavy sacks of gold nuggets, and copper coin. There were also the jewels of the women of Richmond, donated in a last-ditch effort to build a new ironclad ship that would never be built. As Elias heaved the final crate of bullion into the car, a man in a dark frock coat approached him out of the shadows. "Captain Thorne." Elias turned, hand drifting back to his holster. "Yes? I am Walter H. Taylor, aide to General Lee," the man said. He looked exhausted. "The general will not be coming. He is holding the line to buy you time. Time to run," Elias said bitterly. "Time to survive," Taylor corrected. He looked at the heavy crates. "That gold. It is the only thing that can pay for a new army. If Lee falls back to the mountains, if Johnston can link up with us. We need that money. Do not let it out of your sight. Do not trust the banks. Do not trust the rails. Trust only the iron." "I understand," Elias said. "Do you?" Taylor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There are men on this train, politicians, generals, who are already thinking about their life after the war. Gold buys a lot of forgiveness in Europe. Watch your back, Captain." Taylor vanished back into the crowd before Elias could respond. A whistle blew, a long, mournful shriek that cut through the roar of the fire. "All aboard!" Elias climbed into the boxcar with the gold. He sat on a crate of silver bullion, his revolver in his lap. The train jerked, the couplings clanking violently, and then began to move. As the train chugged slowly out of the station, crossing the bridge over the James River, Elias looked back through the open slat of the boxcar. Richmond was dying. The fire had jumped the creek. The business district was an inferno. The flames leaped hundreds of feet into the air, spiraling like tornadoes of light. The Gallego flour mills, the largest in the world, were burning, turning the sky a blinding white. The arsenal had caught fire, and shells were exploding like fireworks, raining shrapnel down on the fleeing refugees. The bridges were burning too. The Confederate engineers had torched the Mayo Bridge to slow the Union advance. The reflection of the burning city on the black water of the James River made it look as if the world had been turned upside down, and they were falling into a fiery abyss. Elias watched the spires of the churches, silhouetted against the orange glow. He thought of the woman with the child. He thought of the men drinking from the burning gutters. He looked down at the crate he was sitting on. Confederate States Treasury. "For this," he whispered to the smoke. "We burned it all for this." The train gathered speed, plunging into the darkness of the Virginia countryside, leaving the funeral pyre of the Capitol behind. But the fire was not just in Richmond. The fire was in the boxcar, in the greed and fear of the men guarding the gold. The journey had just begun, and as Elias watched the shadows lengthen in the corners of the boxcar, he realized that the hardest part of the war wasn't fighting the Yankees. It would be protecting a fortune when a nation had nothing left to lose. The train rattled south, a steel snake carrying the heart of a dead country, moving deeper into the night. The sound of money is usually a whisper, the rustle of banknotes, the clink of a coin in a pocket. But inside the specie train rattling toward Greensboro, money roared. It was a heavy, metallic, grinding sound, a ceaseless groan of wood stressing under the weight of lead, silver, and gold. The suspension of the boxcar screamed with every turn of the wheel. To Captain Elias Thorne, dozing fitfully against a stack of crates, it sounded like the train was chewing on its own bones. He woke with a start as the train lurched over a rough section of track. The lantern overhead swung violently, casting long, nauseating shadows. "Steady," a voice commanded from the darkness. Captain William H. Parker sat on a cracker barrel near the sliding door, a Spencer carbine resting across his knees. He hadn't slept. His uniform, usually immaculate, was dusted with soot and red clay. He looked less like a naval officer and more like a weary grim reaper guarding a harvest of souls. "How far, Captain?" Elias asked, rubbing his face. His hand throbbed where the missing fingers used to be. "Greensboro by dawn," Parker replied, his eyes fixed on the sliver of passing landscape visible through the door crack. "If Stoneman's raiders haven't burned the Reedy Fork Bridge." Elias stood up, bracing himself against the swaying wall. He looked at the cargo. It wasn't just crates. It was a chaotic jumble of wealth packed in whatever containers the Treasury clerks could find in the panic of Richmond. There were polished mahogany chests filled with English sovereigns. There were rough-hewn pine boxes stamped CSA Treasury. And then there were the kegs. Dozens of small, iron-banded kegs filled with Mexican silver dollars. This was the heavy burden. The gold was compact, dense, and valuable. But the silver, it was voluminous, it was heavy, it was a nightmare to move. "The midshipmen?" Elias asked. "Asleep in the forward car," Parker said. "Poor devils. They think this is an adventure. They think we are guarding the Holy Grail." "Aren't we?" Parker let out a dry chuckle. He tapped the barrel of his carbine against the nearest keg. Thud. "We are guarding an anchor, Elias. A solid gold anchor tied to the neck of a drowning man. General Lee has surrendered. The government is running, and we are dragging this weight through the woods, praying it saves us." Parker stood up and walked to a specific box in the corner. It was smaller than the others, reinforced with iron bands and secured with a heavy padlock. "Do you know what is in this one?" Parker asked softly. Elias shook his head. "I assumed more bullion." "No," Parker whispered. "This is the iron box. It contains the remaining assets of the Richmond banks. Not government money, private money. The savings of widows, the capital of merchants, the last reserves of the citizens." He looked at Elias, his expression fierce. "The gold double eagles, those belong to the politicians. They will use them to buy passage to London or Paris. But this box, this belongs to the people we left behind in the fire. If we lose this, Elias, we don't just lose the war, we lose our honor." Greensboro, North Carolina, April 11th, 1865. The train limped into Greensboro, under a sky the color of a bruise. The city was a bedlam of confusion greater even than Danville. Greensboro was the choke point. Here, the remnants of the Confederate government were converging. President Davis, his cabinet, and the generals were all squeezing into a town that was terrified of the approaching Union Army. As the train hissed to a halt, Elias jumped down onto the platform. His boots sank into mud. "Clear the platform!" he shouted, drawing his revolver. A crowd had already gathered. These weren't the weeping refugees of Richmond. These were harder faces. Desperate men. Soldiers from Johnston's army who had heard rumors of the gold train. "Is it true?" a ragged sergeant shouted, stepping forward. He was missing a boot, his foot wrapped in bloody rags. "Is that the treasury?" "Step back, Sergeant," Elias warned. "We're starving," the man screamed. "Johnston's army hasn't eaten in 2 days, and you're sitting on millions." The midshipmen poured out of the forward cars, forming a protective perimeter. They were young, some as young as 14, but they leveled their muskets with practiced discipline. The sight of children holding guns at veterans halted the crowd, but only barely. Captain Parker appeared beside Elias. "We can't stay here. The tracks go south to Charlotte," Elias said. "No," Parker shook his head. "The bridge over the Yadkin River is threatened, and the cabinet is arguing. Beauregard says we can't defend the train here. We have to offload." "Offload?" Elias stared at him. "Captain, there is tons of metal in those cars. We need wagons, dozens of them." "Then find them," Parker ordered. "Requisition them, steal them. I don't care. We move the gold to the vault of the local bank for the night, and tomorrow we head for Charlotte. On wheels." The next 6 hours were a blur of back-breaking labor. Elias scoured the town for wagons. He found rickety buckboards, hay wagons, even a hearse. He conscripted mules that looked ready to collapse. Back at the depot, the transfer began. This was where the reality of the Mexican silver hit them. "Heave!" Elias grunted, his shoulder straining against a keg. It took 2 men to lift a single keg of silver dollars. They were slippery, heavy, and awkward. The gold boxes were dense, but manageable. The silver was a curse. "Why in God's name do we have so much silver?" a midshipman gasped, wiping sweat from his eyes. "It's worth a fraction of the gold, but weighs 10 times as much." "Because beggars can't be choosers," Elias muttered, slamming the keg onto a wagon bed. The axle groaned in protest. As they worked, Elias noticed a group of men watching from the shadow of a warehouse. They weren't soldiers. They wore civilian clothes, but they stood with the stillness of predators. One of them, a man with a bowler hat and a scar running down his cheek, was writing in a small notebook. Union spies? Elias wondered. Or just common thieves? He caught Parker's eye and nodded toward the men. Parker saw them. He rested his hand on his revolver but didn't stop the work. By dusk, the treasure was secure in the temporary vault, a local bank building that looked as sturdy as a cardboard box. The midshipmen set up a perimeter. Elias sat on the steps of the bank, eating a piece of hardtack that tasted like sawdust. President Davis arrived an hour later. He rode up on a gray horse, looking like a specter. He didn't look at the gold. He looked at the horizon. "Captain Parker," Davis said, his voice raspy. "General Johnston is negotiating with Sherman." The words hung in the air. Negotiating. It was a polite word for surrendering. "Does that include us, Mr. President?" Parker asked stiffly. "No," Davis said, a flash of the old fire in his eyes. "We do not surrender. We move to Charlotte, then to Georgia, then to Texas. If we have to fight from the saddle, we will. But we need the funds." "The wagons are ready, sir," Parker said. "Good. Move out at dawn. But Captain, be warned. The cavalry of General Stoneman is burning the tracks behind us. You are the only lifeline left." Davis rode away into the gloom. Elias looked at the line of mismatched wagons loaded with the last wealth of the Confederacy. "Texas," Elias whispered. "He thinks we're going to Texas." "He thinks a lot of things," Parker said, sitting down beside him. "Right now, I'd settle for getting out of this town without getting shot by our own people. The road to Charlotte, April 13th, 1865. The rain began at midnight and didn't stop. The red clay roads of North Carolina turned into a viscous, sucking gumbo. The wagon train moved at a snail's pace. Elias rode point, his horse trudging through knee-deep mud. Behind him, the wagons creaked and slid. Every 100 yards, a wheel would sink to the hub, and the midshipmen would have to pile out, putting their shoulders to the mud-slicked wood, heaving and cursing. The iron box was in the second wagon, guarded by Parker himself. They were in the middle of a dense pine forest when the whistle sounded. It wasn't a train whistle. It was a human whistle, sharp, piercing from the tree line. "Halt!" Elias signaled, raising his hand. The convoy stopped. The only sound was the rain and the heavy breathing of the mules. "What is it?" Parker called out from the rear. "Movement," Elias said, unholstering his lamat. 3 o'clock. A figure stepped out of the woods, then another, then 10. They were Confederate cavalrymen, but they had stripped the insignia from their jackets. Their faces were blackened with soot. They held carbines, not slung, but at the ready. "Lost your way, boys?" the leader asked. He sat on a roan mare, chewing on a piece of tobacco. "We are under orders of the president," Elias said, keeping his voice steady. "Identify yourself." "We're the rear guard," the man grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Or what's left of it. We haven't been paid since Christmas. We heard you got a payroll wagon here." "This is government property," Elias repeated. "The government is dead," the man shouted, his grin vanishing. "Lee gave up. It's over. Now, you can either share the load, or we can leave you here for the buzzards." The man cocked his carbine. Elias's mind raced. There were 20 midshipmen, but they were exhausted and terrified. These deserters were killers. "We have silver," Elias said quickly. "Mexican dollars, in the rear wagon. We want the gold," the leader growled. "The gold is for the president," Elias lied. "If you take it, the Yankees will hunt you down. If you take the silver, well, it's heavy, but it spends." The leader hesitated. He looked at the heavy wagons sinking in the mud. He looked at the nervous midshipmen. "Show me," the leader said. Elias nodded to Parker. Parker understood. It was a calculated loss. They rolled a keg of Mexican silver off the rear wagon. It hit the mud with a dull thud. "Open it," the leader ordered. A midshipman smashed the lid with an axe handle. Silver coins spilled out into the red slush. The deserters stared at it. It was mesmerizing. Even in the rain, the silver seemed to glow. "Take it," Elias said. "Take it and go." The leader looked at Elias, then at the keg. "That's heavy. We can't carry it all." "That's your problem," Elias said. The leader laughed. He signaled his men. They dismounted and began stuffing their pockets, their saddlebags, even their boots with the heavy coins. They gorged themselves on the silver. "Pleasure doing business, Captain," the leader said, remounting. His saddlebags bulged. "You boys better run. Stoneman is about 10 miles east and he ain't taking bribes." The deserters vanished back into the woods, leaving a trail of silver coins in the mud that they couldn't carry. "Let's move," Parker said, his voice shaking with rage, "before they realize how much they left behind." The church in the woods. By nightfall, they could go no further. The mules were blown. They pulled the wagons into the yard of a small, abandoned Methodist church. It was a humble structure, white paint peeling, surrounded by ancient oak trees. They unloaded the most valuable crates, the gold and the iron box, and carried them inside the sanctuary. They placed the millions of dollars of the Confederacy on the altar, beneath a simple wooden cross. The midshipmen collapsed in the pews, sleeping with their weapons. Elias and Parker sat near the door, watching the rain streak the windows. "We lost $10,000 back there," Parker said quietly. We kept the rest, Elias replied. He was cleaning his gun. The mud had gotten into the mechanism. For how long, Elias? Parker asked. He looked old in the candlelight. How long until we run into a force we can't bribe? Or worse, what if the president orders us to bury it? Bury it. If we can't carry it, we can't let the Yankees have it, Parker said. I've been studying the maps. If we reach Georgia, there are swamps, pine barrens, places where things disappear. Elias looked at the iron box on the altar. He imagined burying it in the cold earth, leaving it for the worms and the roots. It feels like a funeral, Elias said. It is, Parker replied. We are the pallbearers. Suddenly, the door of the church burst open. A midshipman who had been on picket duty stumbled in, dripping wet. Captain! Captain! What is it, son? Parker stood up. Riders. Coming from the north. Lots of them. Yankees? No, sir, the boy gasped. It's the president, President Davis, and the cabinet. They're here. Elias walked to the door and looked out. Through the rain, he saw a ghostly procession emerging from the trees. Carriages, horses, ambulances. The government of the Confederate States of America, soaking wet, defeated and huddled against the cold. President Davis rode into the churchyard. He looked at the wagons. He looked at the church. He dismounted and walked up the steps. Elias stepped aside. Davis entered the sanctuary. He saw the gold on the altar. He paused, removing his hat. The treasury is safe, Mr. President, Parker said. Davis nodded slowly. He walked to the altar and placed his hand on the iron box. Safe, Davis whispered. For tonight. He turned to his Secretary of the Treasury, George Trenholm, who was being carried in on a stretcher, ill with neuralgia. George, Davis said softly, we must make a disbursement. The soldiers escorting us. They have no shoes. We must open the kegs. Elias watched as they cracked open the crates in the holy silence of the church. They began counting out gold double eagles. It wasn't a payment. It was a dismantling. As Elias watched the gold glint in the candlelight, he realized the trail wasn't ending. It was fracturing. The gold was about to be scattered like seeds in the wind. And somewhere in the dark woods outside, eyes were watching. The deserters had talked. The secret was out. The hunt for the iron box had truly begun. Charlotte, North Carolina, April 16, 1865. The Charlotte Depot was not a sanctuary. It was a cage. The city was swollen with refugees, deserters, and government officials, all milling about in a humid haze of desperation. But for Captain Elias Thorne, the center of gravity was the brick building of the Charlotte Mint. Inside the cool, vaulted rooms of the Mint, the burden had grown heavier. We are adding the bullion from the local reserves, Captain Parker said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He looked haggard. The circles under his eyes were dark enough to be bruises. And the specie from the bank tellers of Raleigh. Elias watched as the midshipmen, their white uniforms now stained a permanent reddish brown from the mud of the road, struggled to load yet another series of heavy wooden crates onto the dray carts. We barely made it here with the wagons, Captain, Elias said, leaning against a pillar to take the weight off his bad leg. The mules were dead on their feet. Now we're going back to the rails. The Charlotte and South Carolina Railroad is still open, Parker replied, checking his pocket watch for the third time in a minute. It runs to Chester. From there, God willing, we find a way to Abbeville. And the tracks? Damaged, warped, watched. Parker listed the threats, like items on a grocery list. Stoneman's cavalry is tearing up the lines to the north. General Palmer is moving in from the west. We are running down a tunnel, Elias, and they are closing both ends. Elias walked over to the iron box, checking the padlock. It held firm. Beside it sat a new addition. a leather satchel that never left the hand of a senior Treasury clerk. It contained the hard currency for the president's personal expenses. "We leave at dusk," Parker ordered. "We run under the cover of darkness. No headlights. No whistle." The Ghost. The train that pulled out of Charlotte that evening, looked like a phantom. It was a cobbled-together monstrosity, a wood-burning locomotive that leaked steam from a dozen fissures, pulling 4 boxcars and a single, battered passenger coach. The windows of the coach were draped with black, heavy curtains to hide the occupants, members of the cabinet and their exhausted families. Elias sat in the second boxcar, the gold car. The sliding door was cracked open 4 inches, just enough to let in the cool night air and the scent of pine and ozone. Elias sat on a keg of silver, his carbine resting across his knees. Across from him sat Midshipman Carter, a boy of 16 who was trying valiantly to stay awake, his head bobbing with the rhythm of the rails. Clack, 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 clack. The sound was slower than usual. The engineer was keeping the speed down to reduce noise and vibration, fearing the fragile state of the tracks. "Captain," Carter whispered. "Quiet, Carter," Elias hissed. "I heard something. Outside." Elias moved to the door crack. He peered into the gloom. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. The landscape was a blur of black trees and gray fields. At first, he saw nothing. Then, he saw the spark. It was a flint, striking steel, deep in the tree line running parallel to the tracks. A momentary flash illuminating the face of a man lighting a pipe. Elias felt a cold shock run down his spine. The spark was moving. It was keeping pace with the train. "Cavalry," Elias whispered, "riding the service road." "Yankees?" Carter asked, his voice trembling. "Maybe, or maybe just hungry men who know what's on this train." Elias moved to the rear of the car, where Parker was studying a map by the light of a shielded lantern. "Captain, we have shadows," Elias said. "Parallel riders, 3 o'clock." Parker didn't look up. "How many?" "Hard to tell. 1 spark. Could be a scout. Could be a squadron." Parker extinguished the lantern instantly. "Alert the men. No firing unless they breach the tracks. If we shoot, we tell them exactly where we are." The boxcar plunged into total darkness. The tension became physical, a tightening in the chest. Every creak of the wood sounded like a gunshot. Every snap of a branch outside sounded like a saber being drawn. The Catawba River Bridge. The greatest danger lay 10 miles south. The bridge over the Catawba River. It was a long wooden trestle, high above the dark swirling waters. If the Union cavalry wanted to stop the train, they wouldn't attack the armored boxcars. They would burn the bridge. As the train approached the river, the engineer slowed the locomotive to a crawl. The air changed, becoming cooler and damp. Elias knelt by the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned the bridge abutments. "Do you see fire?" Parker whispered. "No fire," Elias breathed. "But something is on the tracks." There was a dark shape in the middle of the trestle. A pile of debris? A barricade? The train crept forward. The locomotive's wheels hit the wooden decking of the bridge. Thump, 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 thump. The sound echoed over the water. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night. Ping! A bullet ricocheted off the iron boiler of the engine. "Ambush!" Elias shouted. "Get down!" The midshipmen threw themselves to the floor of the boxcar. Elias didn't. He braced his carbine against the doorframe and looked for the muzzle flash. Another shot, then a volley. Crack, 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 crack. The flashes were coming from the riverbank below the bridge. They were shooting up at the train, the bullets tearing through the wooden slats of the boxcar. Splinters exploded inward. "Return fire!" Parker roared. Elias aimed at a cluster of sparks on the bank and squeezed the trigger. The Spencer carbine kicked against his shoulder. The midshipmen joined in, their muskets booming like cannons in the confined space. The train didn't stop. The engineer, realizing the danger, threw the throttle open. The locomotive surged. The wheels spun, screeching on the rails before biting in. The train lurched forward, accelerating across the trestle. Bullets pinged off the gold kegs. One struck the iron box with a dull clang, leaving a lead smear on the padlock, but failing to break it. "They're trying to hit the boiler," Elias yelled. "If they blow the steam, we're dead in the water." The train roared across the bridge, picking up speed. The muzzle flashes below fell behind, growing smaller and smaller. As they reached the solid ground on the south bank, Elias kept firing until his magazine was empty. They were clear. "Damage report!" Parker shouted. "Carter is hit!" a voice cried out from the darkness. Elias scrambled over the crates. Midshipman Carter was lying on the floor, clutching his leg. A minia ball had passed through the calf. I'm all right, sir," Carter gasped, his face pale in the gloom. "It just burns." Elias tied a tourniquet with practiced efficiency. "You'll live, son. You'll have a scar to show your grandchildren. If we live that long," Carter muttered. Elias looked at the wall of the boxcar. It was riddled with holes. Moonlight streamed through them, illuminating the gold dust that had been shaken loose from the friction of the coins rubbing together. The floor glittered. They were bleeding gold. Chester, South Carolina, April 17th, 1865. The dawn brought no comfort. The train limped into the railhead at Chester, just as the sun was bleeding over the horizon. The locomotive was hissing steam from a dozen bullet holes in its casing, like a dying beast gasping for air. Chester was the end of the line. Sherman's army, in their march to the sea and subsequent turn north, had twisted the tracks south of here into Sherman's neckties, rails heated over bonfires and wrapped around tree. "This is it," Parker announced, stepping down onto the gravel. He looked at the smoking engine. "She won't go any further." Elias jumped down, wincing as his bad leg hit the ground. He looked south. The road to Newberry was a ribbon of red dust disappearing into the pine forests. "Back to wagons?" Elias asked. "Back to wagons," Parker confirmed. "We have to cross the gap, 30 miles of open country to Newberry, where the rail picks up again. And, Elias? Sir? The telegraph lines are cut. But the locals say Stoneman is in Salisbury. That's too close, and there are rumors of a frantic group of cavalry heading this way. Union? No." Parker lowered his voice. "Ours. Basil Duke's Kentucky cavalry. They are escorting the president. They are riding hard to catch up with us." Elias felt a surge of hope. "Duke? He's a good commander. If we have a cavalry escort, we stand a chance." "Perhaps," Parker said, his eyes narrowing. "But hungry men are dangerous men, Elias. Even Kentucky gentlemen, and when they see what we are carrying." He didn't finish the thought. They began the transfer again, from iron wheels to wooden ones. The kegs of silver felt heavier than before. The gold seemed to radiate a heat that drew eyes from every corner of the town. As they loaded the last box, Elias saw a woman standing on the depot platform. She was dressed in mourning black, a veil covering her face. She wasn't looking at the train. She was looking at the northern horizon, where a column of black smoke was rising into the sky. "What is burning?" Elias asked a station master. "The bridge," the man spat, spitting tobacco juice onto the tracks. "The one you just crossed. The Yankees burned it 20 minutes after you cleared it." Elias felt the cold sweat return. They weren't just running. They were watching the world disappear behind them. The door was closing. "Captain Thorne!" Elias turned. A rider galloped into the station yard. His horse was lathered in white foam. "Message from General Johnston," the rider shouted, handing a pouch to Parker. Parker opened it. He read the dispatch, his face turning to stone. "What is it?" Elias asked. Parker crumpled the paper in his fist. "Lincoln," Parker whispered. "What about him?" "He's dead. Shot in a theater in Washington." The silence that fell over the depot was absolute. The soldiers, the slaves, the townspeople, everyone froze. "Dead?" Elias repeated, unable to comprehend the shift in the universe. "Assassinated," Parker said. 3 days ago. The news just reached the wire." Elias looked at the gold. "God help us," Elias said. "The North won't just want victory now. They'll want vengeance. They will want blood." Parker agreed. "And they will trace this gold to the ends of the earth to get it." "Mount up!" Parker screamed suddenly, breaking the spell. "Get the wagons moving. If the Yankees catch us now, they won't take prisoners." The convoy lurched forward, leaving the broken train behind. They moved into the South Carolina woods, carrying the fortune of a dead nation, hunted by an enemy that was no longer fighting a war, but seeking an execution. Elias rode at the rear, his hand on his revolver. The shadows in the trees seemed longer now, darker. The game had changed. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about survival in a world that had suddenly gone mad. And, in the distance, the sound of hoofbeats began to rise. A low, thunderous rumble coming from the north. Abbeville, South Carolina, May 2nd, 1865. Abbeville was beautiful. That was the most unsettling thing about it. After weeks of burning cities, muddy tracks, and forests filled with desperate men, the wagon train rolled into a town that seemed frozen in a gentler time. The azaleas were in full, riotous bloom, shocking pinks and deep purples against the white clapboard of the antebellum homes. The lawns were manicured, the windows were unbroken. It was a perfect stage for a tragedy. Captain Elias Thorne guided the lead wagon up the gravel drive of the Armistead Burt mansion. The house was a towering structure of white columns and shaded verandas, imposing and graceful. It was here that President Davis had established his final headquarters. "Halt!" a sentry challenged. He wore the uniform of the Kentucky Cavalry. "Treasury escort," Elias rasped. His throat was raw from the dust of the road. "We are expected." The sentry lowered his carbine, his eyes immediately drifting to the heavy, mud-splattered kegs in the wagon. "You boys made it. We took bets you wouldn't." "Who won?" "Nobody. Yet," the sentry muttered. "The game ain't over." Elias climbed down. His bad leg buckled slightly. A spasm of exhaustion. He patted the neck of his mule and looked up at the house. The windows of the parlor were glowing with lamplight. Shadows moved behind the curtains, the silhouettes of men who were currently arguing over the fate of a nation that no longer existed. Captain Parker walked up beside him, dusting off his uniform. He looked at the house with a mix of reverence and pity. "This is it, Elias," Parker said softly. "The end of the line. The rails don't go to Texas." "So what do we do with the cargo?" Elias asked, gesturing to the millions of dollars sitting exposed in the driveway. "We wait," Parker said. "The president is holding a council of war. Our fate, and the fate of this gold, is being decided in that parlor right now." The parlor. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the heavy, suffocating weight of failure. President Jefferson Davis stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantel. He looked like a man consuming himself from the inside out. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes feverishly bright. He was pacing, refusing to sit, refusing to accept the reality that saturated the room. Around him sat the remnants of the Confederate cabinet. John C. Breckinridge, the Secretary of War, slumped in a velvet armchair. He was a majestic figure, a former Vice President of the United States, but now he looked utterly defeated. He poured himself a glass of brandy with a steady hand. Judah P. Benjamin, the Secretary of State, sat in the corner. He was smiling, a habitual, inscrutable smile. He was already planning his escape to England, visualizing a life as a barrister in London, far away from hanging ropes. Stephen Mallory, Secretary of the Navy, looked at his boots. "We must cross the Savannah River tonight," Davis was saying, his voice vibrating with intensity. "We can link up with Kirby Smith in the Trans-Mississippi. There are 30,000 men in Texas. We can continue the struggle there. We can make a stand in the interior until the North tires of the occupation." "Mr. President," Breckinridge said, his voice deep and weary, "the North will not tire. They have just won. And with Mr. Lincoln dead, they are not looking for a truce. They are looking for a scaffold." Davis spun around. "Are you suggesting we surrender, General?" "I am suggesting we face facts," Breckinridge said, setting down his glass. "Johnston has surrendered. Lee has surrendered. The army you speak of, the escort outside, they are dissolving, Jefferson. The men are talking." "Talking of what?" "Of the gold," Breckinridge said bluntly. The room went silent. The elephant in the room had finally been acknowledged. "General Duke's cavalry has escorted us faithfully," Breckinridge continued. "But they haven't been paid in a year. They see those wagons. They know what is inside. If we try to cross the river into Georgia without paying them, we will not have an escort. We will have a mutiny." Davis stiffened. "These are patriots. They are starving men with families," Breckinridge countered. "And they are looking at $500,000 in silver and gold. If we do not distribute it, they will take it. And frankly, sir, I wouldn't blame them." "Judah," Benjamin chimed in, his voice smooth as silk. "There is also the matter of mobility, Mr. President. We cannot outrun the federal cavalry dragging 3 tons of Mexican silver dollars. It is an anchor. We must cut the cable." Davis looked at them. He looked at the map of Texas on the table, a fantasy of salvation. Then he looked out the window, where the wagons sat in the dark. He seemed to shrink. The marble statue cracked. "Very well," Davis whispered. "Pay the troops. Use the silver. It is cumbersome." "And the gold?" Mallory asked. "The bullion? The jewels?" Davis's eyes hardened. "The gold goes with us. It is the seed corn of the new Confederacy. We will need it to buy arms. We will need it to buy influence." "We cannot carry it all," Breckinridge insisted. "It's too heavy." "Then we split it," Davis ordered. "A portion for the troops, a portion for the hazardous journey, and the rest, we hide it. We entrust it to men of honor until we can return for it." Breckinridge nodded slowly. "A wise decision, Mr. President. I will give the order." The disbursement. Outside, the order came down like a hammer blow. "Open the kegs!" Elias watched as the midshipmen, boys who had guarded this treasure with their lives for a month, now took pry bars to the lids. The scene that followed was surreal. Under the light of torches, the Mexican silver was poured out. It wasn't a neat payroll line. It was a distribution of survival. General Basil Duke's cavalrymen lined up. These were hard men, the Orphan Brigade of Kentucky. They filed past the wagons, holding out hats, haversacks, even bandanas. $32 a man, Captain Parker shouted, reading from a ledger. "That is the rate. Take your silver and move along." Elias stood by the wagon, his hand on his holster. He watched the faces of the soldiers. There was no joy in their eyes, just a grim satisfaction. They were taking their severance pay from a bankrupt employer. "It feels wrong," Midshipman Carter whispered to Elias. "We protected it from the Yankees, just to give it away here." "Better them than the Yankees," Elias said. "At least this silver will buy seed for a farm, or a horse to get home." But it wasn't just the soldiers. As the silver flowed, the chaos grew. Officers were arguing over the exchange rate. Quartermasters were demanding funds for supplies that didn't exist. And in the shadows, Elias saw the iron box. It was still sealed. It sat apart from the silver kegs, unnoticed in the frenzy. Captain Parker approached Elias. He held a piece of paper signed by Breckinridge. "New orders, Elias," Parker said quietly. "Sir, the silver stays here. It pays the army. But the gold and the iron box, it goes with the president. Tonight, we cross the Savannah River." "Into Georgia?" "Yes, but not all of it." Parker leaned in close. "The president knows we can't carry everything. He wants to lighten the load before we cross. He wants to make a deposit." "A deposit? Where? There are no banks left." Parker pointed toward the dark woods surrounding the mansion. "The earth, Elias. The earth is the only bank that doesn't burn." The secret of the woods. An hour later, while the cavalry was distracted by the silver distribution, 2 buckboards slipped away from the main convoy. Elias drove the first one. Parker drove the second. They had no escort, just 4 trusted midshipmen. They drove a mile down the road, then turned onto a logging trail that led deep into a pine thicket near the Savannah River. The trees were tall and oppressive, blocking out the starlight. "Here," Parker said, pulling on the reins. They stopped in a small clearing. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles. "Dig!" Parker ordered. The midshipmen grabbed shovels from the wagon bed. They dug in silence, the only sound, the shuck-shuck of metal hitting dirt. Elias helped unload the crates. These weren't the silver kegs. These were the heavy wooden boxes of gold sovereigns. And the sacks of church silver. "Why are we burying it?" Elias asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Why not take it to Texas?" "Because if we are caught with this," Parker said, patting a box of gold, "we are thieves fleeing with the loot. Without it, we are political prisoners. The president needs to travel light to escape. This gold, it's a trail of crumbs for the Union cavalry. We have to break the trail." They lowered the boxes into the hole. It felt like a burial. In a way, it was. They were burying the future of the Confederacy. "Mark the spot," Parker said. Elias took his knife and carved a distinct mark, a triangle with a line through it, into the bark of a large oak tree overlooking the grave. He memorized the triangulation. 20 paces from the oak, 10 from the creek bed. They filled the hole. They covered it with fresh pine needles and dead branches. Within 10 minutes, the spot looked undisturbed. "Who knows about this?" Elias asked. "You, me, the president, and Breckinridge," Parker said. "And these boys." He looked at the midshipmen. "You boys forget this place, you hear me? If you talk, the Yankees will find you. Or worse, the ghosts of this army will." "Yes, sir," the midshipmen chorused, their voices shaking. They got back in the wagons. The iron box was still in Elias's wagon. "What about that one?" Elias asked, nodding to the iron-banded chest. "That one goes with us," Parker said. "That's the bait, and the insurance." The crossing. They returned to the mansion just as the main column was preparing to move out. The atmosphere had changed. The soldiers, their pockets heavy with silver, seemed lighter in spirit, but less disciplined. The unity of the cause had been replaced by the individuality of survival. President Davis emerged from the house. He mounted his horse. He looked at the diminished wagon train. "To Georgia," Davis commanded. The column moved out, heading for the pontoon bridge over the Savannah River. Elias sat on the wagon seat, the iron box directly behind him. He felt a strange hollowness. The great hoard was gone. The millions in silver were being spent on whiskey and corn in Abbeville. The gold bullion was rotting in a hole in the woods. All that was left was the iron box and a few sacks of coin for the road. As they crossed the bridge, the planks rumbling beneath them, Elias looked down at the black water. He realized that the Midnight Council hadn't just dispersed the treasury, it had dispersed the purpose of their journey. They weren't saving the government anymore. They were just running, and somewhere behind them, in the dark woods of South Carolina, a fortune lay sleeping in the ground, waiting for a map, a memory, or a betrayal to bring it back to the light. Elias touched the pocket of his tunic. He had sketched the location of the burial site on a scrap of paper, just in case. Trust no one, the general's aide had said. Elias didn't even trust himself anymore. The Savannah River, May 3rd, 1865. The pontoon bridge swayed sickeningly in the current. It was pitch black. The torches that had lit the disbursement of silver in Abbeville were gone, extinguished to hide their movement from Union scouts. Now, the only light came from the sparks of horse hooves striking stone and the occasional flash of lightning on the western horizon. Captain Elias Thorne gripped the reins of his mule team, his knuckles white. The wagon beneath him felt wrong. It was too light. For weeks he had driven wagons that groaned under the crushing weight of Mexican silver and gold bullion. He knew the sluggish, heavy inertia of treasure, but tonight, as the wheels rattled over the wooden planks of the bridge, the wagon bounced. He looked back. The iron box was still there, lashed to the floorboards, but the other crates, the heavy oak chests of sovereigns, they were gone. "Captain Parker!" Elias called out, his voice barely audible over the rushing water. Parker was riding alongside on a roan mare. He looked like a shadow, his hat pulled low. "Keep moving, Elias. The Georgia bank is steep." "Where is the rest of it?" Elias asked, urging the mules forward. "The manifest said we had 5 wagons of specie. We have 2. Parker didn't answer immediately. He waited until they had scrambled up the muddy bank on the Georgia side, away from the noise of the river. "We lightened the load," Parker said finally. "I know we buried some in the pine thicket," Elias said. "But that was only a fraction. There was more, a lot more." "Where is the bullion, Captain?" Parker stopped his horse. He turned to look back across the river toward South Carolina. The dark silhouette of the Abbeville tree line stood silent against the sky. "It never left Abbeville," Parker whispered. The shell game. Elias stared at him. "What?" "The Midnight Council," Parker explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "It wasn't just about paying the troops. It was about shedding skin. President Davis knows he is a hunted man. A wagon train of gold is a beacon. It draws the eye. It slows the pace. So we just left it?" "We didn't leave it," Parker corrected. "We entrusted it." Parker guided his horse closer, leaning down so only Elias could hear. "Before we crossed the river, while the soldiers were fighting over the silver dollars, 3 wagons turned back. General Breckinridge ordered them to the home of a local judge. Another went to the cellar of the depot master, and the quartermaster general took custody of the bank assets. You scattered it." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Without records, without receipts?" "There are no receipts in a burning house, Elias. It was a shell game. We broke the hoard into a dozen pieces. Some went into saddlebags, some went into basements, some went into the ground." Elias looked at the iron box in his wagon. "And this? That is the distraction," Parker said grimly. As long as they think the main treasury is with the president, they will chase us. They will ignore the quiet houses in Abbeville. We are the decoy, Elias. Elias looked at the iron-banded chest. He had risked his life, shot men, and bled for a decoy. And what is actually in it? Elias asked. If the gold is in Abbeville, what am I guarding? Parker smiled, a thin, ghostly expression in the dark. The most dangerous thing of all, Captain. Names. Washington, Georgia, May 4th, 1865. The remnant of the convoy limped into Washington, Georgia the next day. The town was small, anxious, and buzzing with rumors. This was the final rendezvous. The gold train was no longer a train, nor even a convoy. It was a handful of dusty men and 2 wagons. The midshipmen, the loyal boys from Richmond, were dismissed here. They were given $20 in gold each, a fortune for a boy with no shoes, and told to walk home. Elias watched them go. They looked older than their years, walking away from the war with their pockets jingling and their eyes empty. That night a storm broke. It was a violent southern squall. Rain lashed the town square, turning the red dust to blood-colored mud. Thunder shook the foundations of the herd house, where the Confederate cabinet was holding its final meeting. Elias stood guard over the iron box in the carriage house. The roof leaked, dripping water onto the metal bands of the chest. The door creaked open. It wasn't Parker. It was Judah P. Benjamin, the Secretary of State. Benjamin was dressed in traveling clothes, but not a uniform. He wore a fine wool suit and a cloak. He looked out of place, like a man prepared for a carriage ride in London, not a fugitive run in Georgia. "Captain Thorne," Benjamin said, his voice smooth and calm. "Mr. Secretary." Benjamin walked to the iron box. He placed a hand on it. "You have been a faithful watchdog," Benjamin said. "But the house is sold and the dog is no longer needed." "Sir, the cabinet is dissolving tonight," Benjamin said. "I am heading south to Florida. I intend to sail for the Bahamas. Mr. Breckinridge is heading for Cuba. The president, he refuses to give up. He is heading west." Benjamin reached into his coat and pulled out a key, a heavy, brass key. "Open it," Benjamin ordered. Elias hesitated, then took the key. He unlocked the heavy padlock. He threw back the lid. He expected to see gold, or perhaps rocks if it was truly a decoy. Instead, the box was filled with papers, bundles of letters tied with red ribbon, ledgers, and at the bottom, a layer of small canvas sacks. Benjamin reached in and took the papers. "Diplomatic correspondence," Benjamin murmured, tucking them into his satchel. "Lists of our agents in London and Paris, bank accounts in Liverpool. These cannot be found by the Yankees. They would hang 100 good men." He then pointed to the canvas sacks. "That is what remains of the specie. About $40,000 in gold. It is for the president's escape." Benjamin looked at Elias. "And you, Captain, what is your price?" "I don't have a price," Elias said stiffly. "Everyone has a price tonight," Benjamin said. He reached into one of the sacks and pulled out a handful of gold double eagles. He pressed them into Elias's hand. The metal was cold and heavy. "Take it," Benjamin said. "Go west or go home, but do not stay here. The Union cavalry is in Athens, 20 miles away. They will be here by morning." Benjamin turned and walked out into the storm, vanishing into the night and into history. The disappearance. Elias stood alone in the carriage house. The iron box was open. The secrets were gone. The gold was diminished. He looked at the coins in his hand. Payment, or a bribe. Suddenly, Parker burst into the room. He was soaking wet and frantic. "They're here!" Parker hissed. "The Yankees!" "No, the mob," The locals. They heard the midshipman left. They know the guard is down. Elias looked out the window. Through the rain, he saw shadows moving in the alleyway. Men with torches, not soldiers, civilians. "We have to move the box," Parker said. "Now, to the president's quarters." "It's too heavy," Elias said, "and the wagon wheel is cracked." Parker looked at the open box. He looked at the sacks of gold at the bottom. "Then we carry the sacks," Parker said. "Forget the box. The box is iron. It's a coffin. Leave it." They grabbed the canvas sacks. $40,000 in gold. It was heavy but carryable. They ran through the rain, clutching the gold to their chests like thieves. They reached the back door of the herd house and handed the sacks to Reagan, the postmaster general. "Is this it?" Reagan asked, looking at the paltry amount. "It's all that's left," Parker gasped. They went back to the carriage house to secure the empty iron chest. But when they got there, the carriage house was empty. The iron box was gone. Elias stared at the empty spot on the floor. The wet, muddy footprints of several men led out the back door and into the dark alley. "They took it," Elias whispered. "They took the decoy." "They think it's full," Parker said, wiping rain from his face. He started to laugh, a low, hysterical laugh. "They stole the empty box. They're going to drag that heavy iron bastard into the woods, pry it open and find nothing. Or maybe not nothing," Elias said, remembering the bottom of the box. "Didn't you see?" "See what?" "There was a false bottom," Elias said. "I saw the seam when Benjamin took the papers. There was something underneath the gold sacks." Parker stopped laughing. "A false bottom? I never knew." Elias looked out into the stormy night. The thieves were gone. The iron box was gone. And whatever secret had been hidden beneath the gold, a map, a final order, a key to the buried hoard in Abbeville, was now in the hands of the mob. "It doesn't matter," Parker said, shivering. "It's over, Elias. The president leaves in an hour. The government is gone. You are relieved of duty." Parker held out his hand. "Good luck, Captain." Elias shook it. He walked out of the carriage house and into the rain. He had a pocket full of gold, a missing finger, and a memory of a treasure that had dissolved like sugar in hot water. He walked past the town square. He saw a group of Union cavalrymen riding in from the north end of town, their blue coats black in the rain. They had arrived. Elias pulled his hat down. He turned south, away from the gold, away from the war. But as he walked, he couldn't stop thinking about the marks on the oak tree and the pine thicket. And he couldn't stop thinking about the heavy wagons that had never left Abbeville. The gold wasn't gone. It was just waiting. And Elias knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the rain, that he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Because the iron box might have been empty, but the men who took it wouldn't stop hunting until they found the truth. The mystery of Abbeville had begun.
The Georgia backwoods, May 5th, 1865, the war did not end with a bang. For Captain Elias Thorne, it ended with the snap of a twig. He was 20 miles south of Washington, Georgia, deep in the scrub pine forests that bordered the path to Florida. He was no longer a captain. He had stripped the insignia from his collar and the buttons from his tunic. He was just a man in gray rags, limping south with a pocket full of Judah Benjamin's gold double eagles and a heart full of ash. He had been walking for 12 hours, trying to put distance between himself and the incoming Union cavalry. He slept in short bursts, his back against a tree, his Lemat revolver in his lap. The snap of the twig woke him instantly. Elias didn't move. He opened his eyes to slits. The dawn light was filtering through the canopy, gray and misty. 3 men stood in the clearing. They wore the remnants of Confederate uniforms, butternut trousers, slouch hats, but they carried themselves like bandits. They weren't looking for Yankees. They were looking at Elias's boots. "Nice boots for a walker," one of them said. He was a bearded giant holding a rusted Enfield rifle. "They leak," Elias rasped, not sitting up. "Move along." We heard a rumor, the bearded man said, stepping closer. Heard the Navy boys got paid in gold back in Washington. Heard the cabinet scattered like rats, dropping coins as they ran. I'm infantry, Elias lied. Straggler from Johnston's army. You got soft hands for infantry, the second man noted. He was younger, with a nervous twitch in his eye. He held a knife. And that's a Lamat pistol. That's an officer's gun. A rich officer's gun. Elias tightened his grip on the revolver hidden under his coat. This was the new reality. There was no us anymore. The brotherhood of the trenches had evaporated the moment the payroll wagons opened. Every man on the road was a potential predator. I have 5 shots left in this Lamat, Elias said calmly. You have a rusted rifle and a knife. Do you want to gamble your life for a pair of leaky boots? The bearded man hesitated. He looked at the heavy bulge in Elias's coat pocket. The gold coins. He licked his lips. There's 3 of us, the man growled. And I only need to kill the first one, Elias said. Who goes first? The standoff stretched, silent and heavy as the humid air. The lure of wealth was powerful, but the promise of violence was immediate. Finally, the bearded man spat on the ground. Keep your damn boots. They look like they'd pinch anyway. They backed away, disappearing into the undergrowth. Elias waited 10 minutes before he moved. He realized then that the gold in his pocket wasn't a safety net, it was a target painted on his back. The tavern at the crossroads. By midday, hunger forced Elias towards civilization. He found a ramshackle tavern near a crossroads, little more than a log cabin with a sign that read, "Whiskey and Corn." Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. The room was crowded with the flotsam of the collapse. Paroled soldiers, freed slaves uncertain of their new world, and carpetbaggers already circling the carcass of the South. Elias bought a plate of cornbread and a tin cup of cider. He sat in the darkest corner, his hat pulled low. At the next table, 4 men were drinking heavily. They were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Elias recognized the accents, Tennessee cavalry. Tell you, I saw it, one man whispered, slamming his cup down. They buried it, near the Savannah River. I was on picket duty. I saw Parker and that one-handed captain drive 2 wagons into the woods and come out empty. Elias froze. The cornbread turned to dust in his mouth. You're drunk, Jeb, another scoffed. They took it to Texas. Texas, my ass, Jeb hissed. It's in the ground. Millions. Just sitting there under the pine needles. We just need to go back and find the tree. I saw a mark. A triangle. Elias's hand drifted to his knife under the table. They knew. The secret burial he and Parker had performed, the one meant to be a mystery, was already tavern gossip. We need shovels, Jeb continued, his eyes shining with greed. And we need to move fast before the Yankees pick up the scent. Who's with me? I'm in, the others muttered. Elias stood up slowly. He couldn't let them go back. If they found the gold, they would tear the countryside apart. And if they found the empty hole, they would hunt down the men who dug it. Men like him. He had to leave now. As he turned to the door, a hand grabbed his arm. You look familiar, friend, a voice said. Elias looked down. It was a man sitting alone by the door. He wore a dusty frock coat and wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked like a clerk, or perhaps a banker. I have a common face, Elias said, trying to pull away. No, the man smiled, but his eyes were cold. You have a unique face. Specifically, you have a unique hand. Missing 2 fingers, just like the Captain Jeb was talking about. The tavern went silent. The Tennessee cavalrymen at the next table stopped talking. They turned to look at Elias. Well, well, Jeb said, standing up. His chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. Look what the cat dragged in. It's the one-handed captain. Elias backed up until his shoulders hit the wall. He was trapped. I don't know what you're talking about, Elias said. Don't play coy, Jeb grinned, drawing a large Bowie knife. You know exactly where that gold is buried. You're the map, ain't you? There is no gold, Elias said. It was silver. We paid the troops. You got your share. That was chump change, Jeb spat. We want the heavy stuff, the sovereigns. Now, you can draw us a map on this table, or I can carve one out of your hide. Elias looked around the room. No one moved to help. The lust for gold had paralyzed them all. The clerk in the spectacles watched with clinical interest. Elias drew his Lemat. Back off! He's only got one hand to shoot with, boys, Jeb shouted, lunging forward. Elias fired. The heavy .42 caliber ball caught Jeb in the shoulder, spinning him around. The other three men roared and surged forward. Elias kicked the table over, creating a barricade. He fired again, crack, hitting a man in the leg. The room erupted into chaos. Patrons scrambled for the windows, bottles shattered. Elias vaulted over the bar, looking for a back exit. He saw a kitchen door. He scrambled through it, knocking over a pot of boiling grits. He burst out into the sunlight, startling a tethered horse. He didn't check whose horse it was. He slashed the tether with his knife and swung into the saddle. A gunshot splintered the doorframe next to his head. Elias kicked the horse and it bolted. He galloped down the muddy road, the shouts of the treasure hunters fading behind him. He had escaped, but the secret was out. He wasn't just a fugitive from the Union Army anymore. He was the keeper of the location of the lost millions. Every deserter, every thief, every desperate man in the South was now looking for a one-handed captain. The crossroads of betrayal, 2 miles down the road, Elias slowed the horse. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline crash making his hands shake. He reached into his pocket to check the gold coins. They were still there, but as he pulled his hand out, a piece of paper fluttered to the ground. It was the sketch he had made, the map of the burial site near the Savannah River. He stared at it lying in the mud. If they had caught him, if they had searched him, they would have found it. He climbed down from the horse. He picked up the paper. It was stained with sweat and dirt. 20 paces from the oak, he took out his lucifer matches. He struck one against his boot. He held the flame to the corner of the map. He watched the paper curl and blacken. He watched the triangle mark dissolve into ash. The map was gone. Now, the location existed only in his head. And in Parker's. Where is Parker? Elias wondered. Was he safe? Or had the clerk in the tavern, or men like him, already found Parker? Had Parker talked? Elias remounted. He couldn't go to Florida. The roads south were crawling with treasure hunters. He couldn't go west. The Trans-Mississippi was too far. He had to vanish. He had to become someone else. He looked north, back toward the chaos. Back toward the burnt remains of the cities. It was the last place anyone would look for a man carrying gold. To the ashes, Elias whispered. He turned the horse around. He wasn't guarding the treasure anymore. He was guarding the memory of it. And in a land built on lost causes, memory was the most dangerous thing of all. As he rode, he didn't notice the solitary figure watching him from the ridgeline. A man with a telescope. A man in a blue uniform, but stripped of rank. The Union intelligence officer lowered the glass. He smiled. He didn't need a map. He just needed to follow the one-handed man. The hunt had only just begun. 7 Chenault Plantation, Georgia. May 24th, 1865. The war was technically over, but the invasion of the pine forests had just begun. Major Silas Vance of the 4th Michigan Cavalry sat on a tree stump, watching his men tear the earth apart. He was a man of precise habits. He wiped a speck of red Georgia clay from his polished boots with a handkerchief, even as the air around him choked with dust. Vance was not a combat soldier. He was a hunter. He had spent the last 3 weeks tracking the gold train from the ashes of Richmond to this quiet patch of woods near the Chenault Plantation. He had interviewed terrified slaves, bribed starving Confederate deserters, and pieced together the fractured timeline of the retreat. "Anything, Sergeant?" Vance called out, his voice cutting through the humid afternoon heat. Sergeant Miller, waist-deep in a hole beneath a massive oak tree, wiped sweat from his eyes. "We hit wood, Major, just like the informant said, right by the creek bed." Vance stood up. He walked to the edge of the excavation. The informant, a drunk former private from Duke's Cavalry, had sworn on a Bible and a bottle of whiskey that he had watched 2 wagons turn into these woods 3 weeks ago. He claimed they came out light. The soldiers cleared the dirt from a large, rough-hewn pine box. It was stamped CSA Ordnance. "Pry it," Vance ordered. A soldier jammed a crowbar under the lid. Wood splintered with a sharp crack. The men leaned in, their eyes wide. They expected the glitter of Mexican silver or the dull shine of bullion. The lid flew back. "Son of a bitch," Sergeant Miller whispered. The box was full, but not with gold. It was filled with rocks. River stones, heavy and useless, packed tight with straw. and on top of the stones sat a single, neatly tied bundle of Confederate Treasury bonds, paper money that was now worth less than the straw it was resting on. Vance stared at the box. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply smiled, a thin, dangerous tightening of his lips. "It's a decoy, sir," Miller said, kicking the box. "They played us." "No, Sergeant," Vance corrected softly. "They didn't just play us, they slowed us down. Every hour we spend digging up rocks is an hour the real gold moves further west." Vance looked at the surrounding woods. The pine trees stood silent, their needles carpeting the ground in rust-colored silence. "This wasn't done by panicked men," Vance murmured. "This was calculated. They planted this. They knew we would find the tracks. They knew we would find the witness." He turned back to the sergeant. "Fill it in. We're moving on." "Where to, sir?" "To the man who dug the hole," Vance said. "We don't need to find the gold anymore, Sergeant. We need to find the architect, the one-handed captain." The architect's design. Flashback. 3 weeks earlier. The night of the crossing. Abbeville, SC. Captain Parker stood in the flickering light of a lantern deep in the woods. Elias was busy digging the real hole a mile away. But Parker had a different task for the midshipman. "Dig here," Parker ordered, pointing to a spot that was deliberately easy to find, a spot where the wagon tracks were visible in the soft mud. The boys dug. "Captain," one asked, "why are we burying the ammunition crates?" "Because," Parker said, heaving a heavy stone into the box, "men believe what they want to see. If the Yankees find an empty woods, they will keep looking. If they find a buried box, they will stop. They will think they found the stash, and by the time they realize it's garbage, we will be in Georgia." Parker placed the bundle of worthless bonds on top of the stones. It was a final insult, a message from a dying government to its conquerors. "Cover it," Parker commanded, "and leave the tracks, let them see the ruts." He watched the boys work. It was the planting of a false trail, a ghost story written in the dirt. "Trust no one," Parker whispered to himself. Near Washington, Georgia, present day, May 24th, 1865. Elias Thorne did not know about the rocks, but he knew about the silence. He was hiding in the hayloft of a barn belonging to a sympathetic widow. He had been there for 3 days, nursing a fever that had come on with the rains. The gold double eagles in his pocket felt like burning coals against his hip. From the loft, he could see the road. For the last 2 days, he had watched the Union patrols. They were frantic. They were riding back and forth, stopping every traveler, searching every wagon. But today, the pattern changed. A column of cavalry rode past, heading north. They weren't searching anymore. They were riding with purpose. Elias peered through the slats of the barnwood. He saw the officer at the head of the column, a major with a cold, intelligent face, Vance. The major wasn't looking at the ground. He was holding a piece of paper. A sketch? A description? Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. They weren't looking for the treasure anymore. They had found the decoys. They had realized the game. Now they were hunting the players. He heard the barn door creak open below. "Captain?" It was the widow, Mrs. Gable. Her voice was trembling. Elias drew his lamat, aiming it at the ladder. "I'm here, Martha," he whispered. "There was a soldier," she hissed. "A Yankee sergeant. He came to the house. He asked about strangers. He asked about a man with a missing finger." Elias closed his eyes. They had a description. The clerk in the tavern. The deserters. Someone had talked. "What did you tell him?" "I told him nothing," she said fiercely. "But he's coming back. He went to check the slave quarters. You have to go, Elias. Tonight." Elias holstered the gun. He looked at his hand, the mutilated badge of his service that was now his death warrant. "I need a glove," Elias said, "and I need a new name." "I can give you a glove," Martha said. "But a name? You'll have to find that yourself." Elias climbed down the ladder. He was weak, but the fear gave him strength. "The gold," Martha whispered, looking at his bulging pocket. "Is it worth it? Is it worth dying in a barn for?" Elias took out one of the coins. It featured the image of liberty. "It's not about the value, Martha," he said. "It's the only thing left that proves we existed. If they take this, they take the history." He handed her the coin. "For the hay." "Keep it." She pushed his hand away. "It's blood money. Just go. Elias slipped out the back of the barn. The moon was obscured by clouds, a smuggler's moon. He headed toward the swamps. He remembered Parker's words about the pine barrens, places where things disappear. He had to disappear. But he couldn't just run. He had to lead them away from the real burial site. He had to become the false trail. He found a stick and began to walk, dragging his left foot heavily, creating a distinct, limping track in the mud. He headed west toward the river, away from the buried gold. If they wanted a trail, he would give them one. He would lead them into the darkest, deepest part of the Georgia swamp, and he would bury them there.
Wilkes County Jail, Georgia, June 2nd, 1865. The cell smelled of damp stone, unwashed men, and the metallic tang of fear. It was a small holding room in the basement of the courthouse, repurposed by the Union Provost Marshal as a processing center for high-value detainees. Sunlight filtered through a single barred window at street level, casting stripes across the face of the man sitting on the wooden bench. It was Captain William H. Parker. He was no longer the imposing naval officer who had commanded the treasure train. His uniform was torn, his boots were scuffed, and his beard was matted. He had been arrested 3 days ago, near Augusta, recognized by a former slave who had seen him loading wagons in Abbeville. The heavy iron door groaned open. Major Silas Vance walked in. He looked fresh, clean-shaven, and utterly calm. He carried a folding stool and a leather portfolio. He sat down opposite Parker, just out of reach. "Comfortable, Captain?" Vance asked. Parker didn't look up. "I've slept in worse places, Major. I was on the CSS Patrick Henry during the blockade. This is a palace compared to a hull full of coal dust." Vance opened his portfolio. He took out a piece of paper, a manifest. "Let's talk about arithmetic, Captain," Vance said pleasantly. "According to the records we record from the burning ruins of the Richmond Treasury, you left the capital with approximately $500,000 in gold bullion, $300,000 in silver coin, and a king's ransom in jewelry." Parker remained silent. "We recovered the silver," Vance continued. "Or most of it. We found your boys in Abbeville. They spent it on whiskey and horses. We confiscated what was left." Vance leaned forward. "But the gold, Captain. The bullion. The sovereigns. The jewels. They are missing." "Spent," Parker said, his voice raspy. "The war was expensive, Major. Supplies, bribes, fodder." "Bullshit," Vance said softly. "You didn't spend $500,000 in gold in 3 weeks. Not in Georgia. There is no food to buy. There are no guns to buy. You hid it." Vance pulled another item from his bag. It was a rock, a smooth, heavy river stone. He tossed it onto the floor between them. It landed with a dull thud. "We found your box in the pine woods, Captain. Very clever. My men dug for 6 hours to find a box of rocks. I admit I was impressed. It takes a cool head to pack a decoy while your world is burning." Parker smiled, a thin, cracked expression. "I'm glad you enjoyed the exercise, Major." "I didn't," Vance said, his voice hardening. "And neither did General Wilson. He wants that gold. He believes it is being used to fund an insurgency. He believes you are planning to reignite the war from Texas." "The war is over," Parker said wearily. "Jefferson Davis is in irons at Fortress Monroe. The armies are disbanded. There is no insurgency, just tired old men wanting to go home." "Then give me the gold," Vance said. "Give me the location, and you walk out of here. You go home to your family. You get a parole. And if I don't, then you go to prison," Vance said. "Fort Delaware. Or maybe we try you for theft. This isn't war anymore, Captain. It's larceny. You are stealing from the United States government." Parker looked at the shaft of sunlight. He thought of Elias. He thought of the triangle carved into the oak tree. "I don't know where it is," Parker lied. We split up. I took the silver. The president took the gold. If it's not with him, then maybe the cavalry took it. Maybe it's in a saddlebag in Mexico by now. Vance studied him. He saw the flicker in Parker's eyes. "You're a loyal man, William," Vance said, using his first name. "I respect that. But loyalty to a dead cause isn't honor. It's suicide." Vance stood up. He walked to the door and knocked twice. The door opened. 2 soldiers dragged in another prisoner. It was Midshipman Carter, the boy with the wounded leg. He looked terrible, feverish, pale, his leg bandaged in dirty rags. He could barely stand. "Captain!" Carter gasped, seeing Parker. Parker stood up, his chains rattling. "Leave the boy alone, Vance. He's a child." "He's a combatant," Vance corrected. "We picked him up on the road to Savannah. He was carrying this." Vance held up a single gold sovereign. "He says you gave it to him," Vance said. "Severance pay. But he also says he was there the night you drove the wagons into the woods. The night of the secret burial." Parker felt the blood drain from his face. "He doesn't know where it is," Parker said, desperate. "He stayed with the horses. He didn't see the hole." "Maybe," Vance said. "But memories can be jogged. A feverish boy in a dark cell. He might remember a landmark, a direction, a tree." Vance looked at Parker. "I'll give you an hour, Captain. Talk to the boy. Decide if his leg and his life is worth a pile of metal that belongs to a dead nation." Vance turned to leave. "Wait!" Parker shouted. Vance stopped, his hand on the door. "If I tell you," Parker whispered, looking at the terrified boy. "If I tell you, do you swear he goes free and receives medical attention?" "I swear," Vance said. Parker slumped onto the bench. He looked defeated. He looked at Carter, whose eyes were pleading. "It wasn't in the pine woods," Parker said softly. "That was the first decoy. The rocks. Go on. The real cache. It's not in the ground." Parker lied. He had to give them something. A new trail. A distraction to buy Elias time. "It's in the water." "The water?" "The Savannah River," Parker said, his voice gaining strength as he constructed the lie. "We realized we couldn't carry it. We couldn't bury it safely. So we sank it. 5 miles south of the pontoon bridge, in the deep channel near the bend." Vance stared at him. "You threw $1 million into the river." "Ideally, we would come back with a dredge," Parker said. "But now, it's just mud and gold." Vance watched him for a long moment. He was weighing the lie. It was plausible. Desperate men did desperate things. "If I drag that river and find nothing, Parker," Vance warned, "I will come back, and I will burn this jail down, with you in it." "Check the river," Parker said, meeting his gaze. Vance nodded to the guards. "Get the boy to the infirmary, and get a dredging crew ready." As they dragged Carter out, the boy looked back at Parker. He knew Parker was lying. They hadn't gone near the river bend. Parker sat back on the bench. He had bought time. A week, maybe 2, while they searched the muddy waters of the Savannah. But he knew it was a temporary victory. Vance was smart. He would figure it out. And somewhere out there, Elias Thorne was still running. Parker closed his eyes and prayed. "Run, Elias. Run far, because they are coming." Savannah, Georgia, November 1889. The war had been over for 24 years, but in the boarding house on Abercorn Street, the air still smelled of surrender. It was a smell composed of boiled cabbage, damp wool, and the peculiar dusty scent of men who had outlived their own history. The city outside was changing. Electric streetcars were beginning to clatter down Bull Street, and the port was bustling with steamships bound for Liverpool and New York. The New South was rising from the ashes, eager to forget the fire. But the man in room 4B could not forget. He was known to his landlady as Mr. Elias Ash. He was a quiet tenant, a clerk at a cotton brokerage who paid his rent on time and never spoke of politics. He had a limp in his left leg and a left hand that was missing 2 fingers, injuries he attributed to a threshing accident in his youth. Now, however, the accident of his life was coming to an end. Consumption had taken him. It was a slow, rattling death, a drowning on dry land. For 3 days he had lain in the iron bedstead watching the cracks in the ceiling plaster widen like the fissures of a map. Outside, a cold autumn rain lashed against the window pane. It sounded like the drumming of fingers, or the drumming of hooves. There was a knock at the door. "Mr. Ash?" The landlady's voice was hesitant. "There is a gentleman to see you. He says he is an old acquaintance." Elias tried to sit up, but his lungs betrayed him. He collapsed back onto the pillow, coughing until he tasted copper. "Send him in," Elias whispered. The door opened. A man stepped into the dim room. He was older now, his hair the color of steel wool, his face lined with the deep grooves of a life spent looking for things that did not want to be found. He wore a dark suit, damp from the rain, and he carried a silver-headed cane. Elias recognized him instantly. He hadn't seen the face in 24 years, but he had seen it in his nightmares every night. "Major Vance," Elias rasped. Silas Vance closed the door softly. He pulled a wooden chair to the bedside and sat down. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He looked simply relieved. "It's just Mr. Vance now, Elias," the man said. "I retired from the service in '70. I'm a lawyer in Atlanta now." "A lawyer," Elias managed a dry, wheezing chuckle. "Fitting. You always like the fine print." Vance rested his hands on his cane. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Captain Thorne. You have a talent for disappearing." Elias Ash. A bit on the nose, don't you think? Rising from the ashes? "I didn't rise," Elias murmured. "I just drifted." "I found Parker, you know," Vance said conversationally. "Years ago, he was living in Virginia. He swore to his dying day that the gold was in the Savannah River. We dredged that bend until the mud was sifted like flour. Nothing. Parker was a good officer," Elias said. "He knew how to hold a line." "He lied," Vance said, his voice tightening slightly. "Just like the midshipmen lied, just like the deserters lied. Everyone had a story. A cave in Virginia, a well in Danville, a hollow tree in Washington." Vance leaned forward, the gaslight reflecting in his eyes. "But you, Elias, you were the only one who vanished completely. You were the one with the iron box. You were the one with the map." Elias looked at the ceiling. He felt the weight of the years lifting. The game was over. There was no court-martial waiting for him now. No prison cell, only the grave. "Why do you care, Silas?" Elias asked softly. "The war is over. The gold, it's just metal. It won't bring Lincoln back. It won't bring the boys back." "It's not about the gold," Vance said. "It's about the puzzle. I spent 10 years of my life chasing a ghost train. I need to know, Elias. Was it real? Or did we chase a myth while you and Parker laughed at us from the woods?" Elias turned his head on the pillow. He looked at the man who had hunted him across a broken country. He saw not an enemy but a fellow casualty. "It was real," Elias whispered. Vance exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "Where?" Elias reached a shaking hand toward the bedside table. "The Bible. Hand it to me." Vance picked up the worn leather Bible and handed it to the dying man. Elias opened it. The pages were thin, crinkled with age. He flipped to the back, to the blank flyleaf. "I burned the map," Elias said. 24 years ago, in the mud outside a tavern. Then it's gone. Ink burns. Elias tapped his temple. Memory doesn't. He reached for a pencil lying on the table. His hand trembled violently. "Help me," Elias commanded. Vance hesitated, then reached out and steadied Elias's hand. The Union hunter, holding the Confederate hand. Together the pencil touched the paper. Elias began to draw. It wasn't a map of a town. It was a map of trees, a creek bed, a distinct fork in a stream. "The Chenault plantation," Elias whispered, "but not the woods you searched. You searched the east section, where the wagon tracks led." "We found the box of rocks," Vance said. "Decoys," Elias said. "We buried the bullion a mile west. Across the creek, there is a grove of 3 oaks. They form a triangle. But the trees, they grow fast in Georgia." Elias sketched the triangle. He marked a spot in the center, 20 paces north-northwest from the center point. "It's deep," Elias coughed. 6 feet, packed with clay. We put a layer of charcoal over it to absorb the moisture. He finished the drawing. The pencil slipped from his fingers and rolled onto the floor. "Why?" Vance asked, staring at the sketch. "Why give it to me now? You could have dug it up. You could have lived like a king." Elias looked around his shabby room. "I took $40,000 in gold from the iron box that night in Washington. It was supposed to be my payment. And I spent it," Elias said. "Not on myself. I gave it to the widows of the men in my company. I paid for headstones. I bought farms for men with no legs. It took me 10 years to give it all away." He looked at Vance with clear, haunted eyes. "That gold is cursed, Silas. It's the blood of a dead nation. If you spend it, it eats you. If you keep it, it rots you. I'm giving it to you because I hate you enough to let it become your burden." Elias reached under his pillow. He pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He handed it to Vance. Vance unwrapped it. It was a heavy brass key. It was tarnished, almost black with age. "The key to the iron box?" Vance asked. "No," Elias whispered. "The iron box was smashed open by the mob in '65. This is the key to the strong box inside the bullion crate. The one with the jewels, the wedding rings, the lockets." Elias's breathing became shallow. The rattle in his chest grew louder. "It's all there, Silas. The Mexican silver is gone. The paper money is dust. But the heart is still in the ground." Vance held the map and the key. He looked at the drawing. It was precise. It was actionable. He could get a train to Lincolnton tomorrow. He could be digging by Tuesday. "Thank you, Captain," Vance said softly, but Elias didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the rain-streaked window, seeing something beyond the gray buildings of Savannah. Perhaps he saw the smoke of Richmond. Perhaps he saw the pine forests of his youth. The rattle stopped. The chest settled. Captain Elias Thorne was gone. Vance sat in the silence for a long time. He looked at the dead man's face. It was peaceful for the first time in decades. Vance looked at the map. Millions of dollars. A fortune that could build railroads, buy senators, build mansions. He stood up. He walked to the fireplace where a small coal fire was dying in the grate. He held the map over the embers. The paper curled. The heat turned the pencil lines to silver. "It eats you," Elias had said. Vance hesitated. He was a practical man, a rational man. He had spent half his life solving this puzzle. To burn it now, it would be madness. He pulled the map back. He folded it carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, next to his heart. He put the brass key in his waistcoat pocket. "Rest easy, Elias," Vance whispered. "I'll take the watch from here." He put on his hat and walked out of the room, leaving the dead veteran to the landlady and the state. He walked out into the rainy streets of Savannah. He touched his chest. He could feel the paper through the fabric. It felt heavy, heavier than gold. He walked toward the train station. He told himself he was going to Atlanta, to his home, to his law practice. But when he reached the intersection, he didn't turn toward the station. He turned west, toward the depot, toward the train that ran to Lincolnton, toward the woods. The war was over. The Reconstruction was over. But the trail went on forever.
Georgia, present day. The metal detector screamed. It wasn't the polite beep-beep of a coin hunter finding a penny in a park. It was a high-pitched, sustained wail that cut through the silence of the Georgia pine forest, like a siren. "Jack, get the shovel!" Ray Miller dropped to his knees in the red dirt. He was 60 years old, wearing camouflage cargo pants and a t-shirt stained with sweat. He had spent 40 years of his life chasing this signal. He had divorced twice, mortgaged his house 3 times, and read every diary, letter, and court transcript from 1865. His son Jack ran over with a spade. "Is it big, Dad?" "It's huge," Ray said, his hands shaking as he cleared the pine needles. "The discrimination signal says non-ferrous. It's not iron. It's not steel. It's gold or silver, Jack. It's the horde." They dug. The ground was hard, packed clay and root systems that fought them for every inch. For a century and a half, this land had kept its secrets. After Major Vance disappeared into these woods in 1889, never to be seen again, the legend had only grown. In the 1920s, a farmer plowing a nearby field found a cache of 100,000 in gold coins. In the 1970s, a flood washed out a creek bank and revealed a rotting wagon wheel and 3 Mexican silver dollars. But the main hoard, the millions, the jewels, it remained a ghost story. "I hit something!" Jack shouted. The shovel rang out. Clang. Ray threw aside his trowel and clawed at the dirt with his bare hands. He brushed away the red clay, revealing a surface. It wasn't wood. It wasn't a rotting chest. It was a rusted iron plate. "It's a strong box," Ray whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "It's the iron box, or one of the bullion crates." They pried the plate loose. Beneath it was a cavity lined with rotting wood. Ray shone his flashlight into the hole. It was empty. The legacy of the key. Ray sat back on his heels, the devastation hitting him like a physical blow. "It's gone. Someone beat us to it." He shone the light around the edges of the hole. There, resting in the corner, half buried in the dirt, was a small green glass bottle. Ray picked it up. It was an old medicine bottle, the kind used in the late 19th century. Inside, sealed with wax, was a rolled-up piece of paper. Ray broke the bottle against the shovel. He pulled out the paper. It was brittle, yellowed with age. He unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and faded to a pale brown. "To the hunter who follows, you have dug deep. You have solved the riddle of the trees. You have found the spot where a nation buried its heart. But you are too late. I stood where you stand in November of 1889. I held the map drawn by a dying man. I held the key. I dug this hole and I looked upon the face of the treasure. It was magnificent. It was enough to buy a city. It was enough to corrupt a soul. I sat with it for 3 days. I thought of the good I could do. I thought of the power I could wield. And then I thought of Elias. I thought of the blood on this gold, the lives it cost, the war it prolonged. This gold does not belong to the future. It belongs to the past. It is a contagion, and I will not be the one to release it back into the world. I have moved it, not far, but deep, into a place where no metal detector will sing and no map will lead. I have returned it to the earth, not as a cache, but as a grave. Go home, plant a tree, kiss your wife. The war's over. Let it stay over. S.V. Ray stared at the note. S.V. Silas Vance. "Dad?" Jack asked, looking at the empty hole. "What does it say? Did he steal it?" Ray looked at the surrounding woods. Thousands of acres of dense forest, swamp, and river. "Not far," the note said, "but deep. It could be anywhere, at the bottom of a well, under the foundation of an old farmhouse, sunk in the middle of the swamp." Ray laughed. It started as a chuckle and turned into a roar that echoed off the trees. "He didn't steal it, Jack," Ray said, standing up and pocketing the note. "He buried it again. He buried it so deep that nobody would ever have to die for it again." "So we lost?" Jack asked, kicking the dirt. Ray looked at the rusted iron plate. He looked at the bottle shards. "No," Ray said. "We didn't lose. We just found the end of the story." The unmarked grave, Ray and Jack filled in the hole. They packed their gear. They walked out of the woods as the sun began to set, casting long shadows that looked like marching soldiers. They left the forest silent. But deep in the woods, a mile west of where they had dug, there is a small, overgrown cemetery. It belongs to an old church that burned down in 1910. The headstones are weathered, illegible, covered in moss. In the corner of the cemetery, under the roots of a massive magnolia tree, there is a grave with no marker. The ground is sunken slightly. Above it, the wind rustles the leaves, whispering like the voices of midshipmen, cavalry scouts, and desperate captains. Underneath the soil, encased in concrete, poured by a weary lawyer in 1889, lies a collection of rotting oak chests. Inside them, the gold double eagles of the Confederacy sleep in the dark. The jewels of the Richmond ladies sparkle in the blackness, unseen by any living eye. They are waiting. They wait for the roots to crack the concrete. They wait for the earth to shift. They wait for the next storm to wash away the history and reveal the glint of metal. The treasure is not gone. It is simply resting. And as long as there are men who dream of lost causes and easy fortunes, the ghosts of the gold train will never truly sleep. The trail of ashes does not end. It only circles back to the beginning. The end.